Hey everybody, my name is Matt, and I want to say thank you for joining us here online today at First Baptist Church. We're going to have our sermon in just a second, but I want you to know that if you're watching this live right now, join us in the chat. We'd love to interact. If you aren't watching live, but you'd like to join us, every 10:30 on Sunday mornings, we launch a new video. So enjoy this today. I hope it's impactful and changing to your life. Hey everybody, and welcome to the very first installment of a brand new series that we're launching right now called It's Too Much. Here's the thesis behind it: that we all carry baggage from different parts of our life that really slow us down and make it harder to move. And so we thought we would spend a few days talking about how we can release some of these things and really live the life that God would have for us. So you'd expect with a series like this that I would launch in about all of the terrible mistakes that you've made in life, or maybe the hurts that have been done to you. But today I'm actually going to zag and tell you right now that there has never been a better time to be alive than right now. See, in fact, I'm not somebody who's down on the future. I'm actually very excited about it. Yeah, I know there's a lot of reasons to be pessimistic. There's issues that we have in the Middle East. We have even societal challenges that are back here in the United States. But at the end of the day, when you look at just the trajectory of progress, the trajectory of technology, there are some things that we can get excited about. About a year ago, I started going down this rabbit hole of videos of futurists that have looked at where we've been, some of the developments that we've recently made, and where they're eventually going to lead us. And some of the things got me very excited. Things like, never having to have a battery in your phone ever again, because the kinetic energy of just moving it around, as well as radiation and radio waves, are able to keep it charged. Things like having liquid-based computers that you can have actually injected into your body that reads your vitals, figures out where you're sick, and actually produces the chemicals and the drugs that you need to stay healthy at any given moment without having to go to a doctor. I'm talking about things that you can actually have some of your mental images put onto a screen because something can read your mind enough to put it onto a screen. I mean, the future has some really exciting things. I mean, imagine for a second a world where you never have to operate a vehicle again. I'm talking about a fully automated car system to where you dial it up on your phone, you hop in the vehicle, and you get from San Diego to Los Angeles in just an hour because everything is worked out to the nth degree and you don't have to worry about accidents or traffic or anything like that. I mean, imagine a world for a second where AI and robots are making our lives more efficient, but at the same time, more comfortable. Imagine a world, if you will, where the ice cream machines at McDonald's are never down, and you can get that hot fudge sundae whenever you want. I'm telling you guys, the future is bright. There's never been a better time to be alive than right now. I mean, just imagine for a second that you were an 18-year-old today with your whole life ahead of you. You land at the right college, you make the right friends, you get in the right industry, you can have great accomplishments. But to what end? There once was a man in U.S. history by the name of J.P. Morgan. He was the first person in the United States to ever manage a billion-dollar company. In fact, he bailed out the United States not once, but twice. We were headed towards an economic collapse, and they called him up, and he said, yes, let me lend you the money to keep disaster at bay. He owned a third of all the U.S. railways at a point when that was the preeminent industry in our country. His nickname, the King of American Finance. And then in 1913, he died. And outside of being the president of the United States, he probably couldn't have had a bigger impact. And if his name wasn't part of a bank, it's JP Morgan Chase Bank, if his name wasn't part of it, you may have never even heard of him. And chances are in about 200 years, your kids' will probably have no clue who he ever was. So imagine for a second being the wealthiest, most significant person of your age, only to be just an answer to a trivia question 110 years later. And folks, 110 years is not that long. Let's make this a little bit more personal. Do you know your grandpa's name? There's a really high likelihood that you don't. Like even within your own family, the words of the author of Hebrews rings true. Your life is a vapor. It's here for a moment and then it's gone forever. There's this story in the Hebrew scriptures about a man who God appears to. This man had just been made the king of Israel. And God appears to him in a dream and says, whatever you want, whatever you need, I'm ready to give it to you. And he could have asked for anything. And in a moment of real sobriety and, honestly, just pure intellect, he chooses wisdom. He says, I need wisdom to rule these people well. And God is so impressed with that answer that he grants him wisdom. He makes him the smartest man on the planet, but then he gives him everything else too. Fame, prestige, and wealth. And here's what he learns. It wasn't enough. I mean, he spends his life impressing everyone. People would travel for thousands of miles to sit in his presence and learn at his feet. And here's what he learns. Fame wasn't enough. We find out that he indulges in every sexual fantasy you could ever imagine, sleeps with well over 1,000 women, and what he learns, sex is not enough. He feasts on the richest delicacies that the world could ever offer him, and he realizes that excess is not enough. And he actually pens this in Ecclesiastes 1:2. Everything is meaningless, says the teacher. Completely meaningless. Now, if you're sitting on the other side of the screen right now, you're wondering, okay, well, Matt, what's the alternative? Is it to be like lonely, poor, and stupid? No, I'm not saying that. Like, that's not the key to a meaningful and fulfilling life. But Jesus said something very similar to the teacher in Ecclesiastes. But I think he says something even scarier than what was written in Ecclesiastes. See, Solomon reached a point where he tried everything and concludes that it wasn't enough. But Jesus says something a little bit different. Imagine living a life where every dream you've ever had, every accomplishment you've ever strived for, anything that you thought would be worthy of your time, you get it. And you do conclude, this was enough. In fact, this is what Jesus says in Matthew 16:26. He says, and what do you benefit if you gain the whole world, but you lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? Jesus is saying you were made for more. Mankind might be on the verge of more achievement and more greatness. Maybe not you, but your kids or your grandkids will probably watch man walk on Mars. There are certain diseases that we will be able to eradicate in our lifetime. You personally may be on the verge of greatness, and like J.P. Morgan, you may change the course of history. Your name might even be remembered. But my question is it worth it? What were you made for? What do you find satisfaction and wholeness in? Because I believe that a lot of us, we strive after things because ultimately there's something missing inside of us, and we believe that if we find the right puzzle piece, we can fit it right in and fix the brokenness that we experience on a daily basis. Like when you work so hard to be famous and you actually get there, it's one of the things you realize is that we believe that fame will fix the brokenness that's inside of us. Or when you work so hard to find predictability in life. In fact, one of the reasons why so many people strive after wealth, it's not necessarily because they want the achievement or the accolades associated with being rich. It's because they want to wake up every morning and not worry that they're one or two decisions away from complete and utter disaster. And they think money will fix the brokenness that's inside. Or when you work so hard to chase the high of entertainment, whether it's through drugs or alcohol, it's because you believe that there's something in there in that experience that will fix the brokenness that's inside. Or when you work so hard to find that other person, that you go onto the dating apps, you go to the bar scene, wherever it is you go to find another person, and you actually meet them and give your life to them, it's because you think that that missing piece will be fixed by them. Or when you walk across the stage and you get that degree, or you give your contribution to that neighborhood that has so many problems and issues, it's because you believe that through contribution and growth, you'll fix the brokenness that's inside. And my thesis is that you will accomplish several of these things, maybe even all of these things, and that you're still going to come up empty. See, you were made for more. Only Jesus can fix the brokenness that's inside of you. In fact, the entirety of Jesus' quote about losing your soul and gaining the whole world, it actually goes like this. It says in verse 24 of Matthew 16, "Then Jesus says to his disciples, 'If any of you wants to be my follower, you have to give up your own way, take up your cross, and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul?'" Now, this sounds backwards, but here's what Jesus is saying. The way to gain is to give up. You were made for more. It's not that you can't be ambitious, but it's giving up your glory for his glory. And it's not that you can't find love. It's putting things in the right order where Jesus is first and your spouse is second. It's not that you can't go on an adventure or even find security and predictability. It's submitting to him and trusting him in the process. See, even before Jesus gets to this whole quote about how to gain is to give up, the part of the story that we didn't get to read yet is very, very revealing to this whole thing. In fact, here's the sequence. Jesus and the boys are walking to Caesarea Philippi, and as they're going, they're seeing the remains of Mesopotamian gods, Greek gods, and Roman gods. This was a religious center for so many. And Jesus decides, I'm going to take the temperature of the group. He's like, there's a lot of rumors about who I am, but who do you think that I am? And you got to remember, at this point, Jesus was making an impact. He was like a force of nature. I mean, quite literally, he was stopping forces of nature. His teaching, it was A+. Everybody wanted to hear it. His miracles were life-changing. He wasn't taking on the burden and all of the junk that the religious rulers were trying to force upon him. And even within his own group, people had opinions. Many of them were following Jesus because they thought he was going to be this political savior. In fact, if you really look at their story, you see that many of them thought at first, this is the one. He's going to restore Israel. And when he rises to power, if I'm in the right position at the right time, I will also be in power with him. And so Jesus asked him, yes, I know there's a lot of thoughts, but who do you say that I am? And they start throwing out, once again, just wisdom of the crowd. Like, some are saying a prophet. Maybe you're John the Baptist. Maybe you're Elijah, or maybe you're Jeremiah. And, whether they meant like reincarnate or whether they just meant like, this is in the same spirit, kind of the same way that we might say the second coming of Michael Jordan or the second coming of Messi, the second coming of Obama. Like, maybe it's like, this is like the next iteration of these types of figures. That's a conversation for another day. But he's like, no. I know there's thoughts, but who do you say that I am? And in verse 16 of Matthew 16, Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus replies, "You are blessed, Simon, son of Jonah, because my Father in heaven, he has revealed this to you. You did not learn this from any human being." I mean, what an incredible moment for Peter. If you've ever really read through the Gospels, you see that Peter often is not saying the right thing, but in this moment, he does. And what we learn is it wasn't even his idea, that God has actually spoken this into Peter's heart, and he's arrived at the conclusion that yes, he is the Messiah. He is the one who's been promised, but he's also the Son of God. And in verse 19, "Now I say to you that you are Peter," which means rock, "and upon this rock I will build my church, and all the powers of hell will not conquer it. And it will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And whatever you forbid on earth will be forbidden in heaven, and whatever you permit on earth will be permitted in heaven." And from this exchange, entire movements, churches, and the world have been impacted. See, Peter didn't create something. He had something revealed to him, and in his possession is now the most transformative thought and truth in the history of the world. Yet, Peter cannot stop himself. Because then Jesus starts to explain that for him to truly live out his calling of being the Messiah and the Son of God, he must become the suffering servant who is going to die. And then Peter pushes back and says, "You can't die. I won't let you. You have to be king. Essentially what he's saying is, yeah, but if you die, this movement is dead. If you die, you don't get to sit on the throne. If you die, everything that we're working for, it will not happen. And Jesus knew better. He knew he had to give up to gain. And Peter was made for more than the prominence in a government and in a kingdom and even in a religious movement. He's saying, like, only God could reveal this to you, but you cannot have Jesus plus anything else, because it's Jesus plus nothing. You were made for more, Peter. Now, there's another encounter that I think actually encapsulates this even better. 3 chapters later in the book of Matthew, there's this incredibly successful young man who comes to Jesus. He was the kind of guy who he got into an Ivy League school and graduates with honors. He's the type of guy who founded his own company when he was 22 and then sells it when he's 25 for like multiple millions of dollars. And he's the type of guy that he's taken that money and now he's on to the next venture. And in his world, everyone would always seek him out for an audience, that they wanted to hear his thoughts and get his opinions and be part of the conversation that he is in. But he recognizes something is missing in his life. And he begins listening to Jesus' teaching, and he's affected by it. And he realizes, wow, he's offering me something that I'm not getting anywhere else. This starts making sense, and he wants to be somebody who follows Jesus. And remember, he's at a stage in life where he never had trouble getting an audience with anybody. So he has some conversations, and he gets almost like a backroom conversation with Jesus. And he asks him the question, what do I need to do to get eternal life? And after some back and forth about doing the right things and avoiding the wrong things, Jesus finally gets to the heart of the matter for this man. It says in verse 21, Jesus told him, if you want to be perfect, go and sell all your possessions and give the money to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. Then you can come and follow me. What he's saying is, you're going to have to give up to gain. Bro, you were made for more. And so he did. He sells everything off, and he gives it to the poor, and he goes and he follows Jesus, and he impacts the world over. Except he doesn't do that. It says in verse 22, but when the young man heard this, he went away sad, for he had many possessions. In other words, he was not desperate enough. What he's saying is, Jesus, I don't think that you can satisfy me completely. And let me be very clear for a second, that Jesus's advice, not just advice, but his command to this rich young ruler is not necessarily the same thing he's going to tell all of us. Because Jesus isn't necessarily down on money or prestige, because he often lavishes both on people. But what I think he is saying is, you were made for more. That you had so much more to offer than just what this world can have. And I want the thing that you are afraid to give me. The thing that is getting in the way, the thing that you think is going to satisfy you, the thing that you think is going to complete you, the thing that you think is going to bring you wholeness, you're going to have to give that up so that you can ultimately gain. And I don't think this is the main point of the passage, but I do find it pretty interesting that this is a guy who everybody knew who he was in his day and age, that he was the rich young ruler, that he had everything going for him. And we know the names of the 13 other people who were an audience to this conversation, but for him, we only get a description, the rich young ruler. And it's so interesting because he probably thought that, man, if I give all this up, I lose my status and I lose my position and my legacy is done. But in the process, he has completely forgotten other than just some descriptors about what type of person he was when he had the conversation. And it's almost like you can hear in the subtext, you were made for more. I recently heard this story about this young high school football player back east. And this was in a rural part of the country. And he was the type of guy who just loved being in the outdoors. So he actually got into this hobby called spelunking, the idea of that you go cave diving. So, he's got the whole headset thing, and he starts going and checking out some of the caves that were in some of the land behind his house. And in one of those caves, he looks up at some of the veining on the wall, and there's a sparkle to it that catches his eye. And so he gets out, he goes home, he starts Googling and he starts to piece it together that I think I just found a silver deposit. And so he does a little bit more research, and he goes back and he looks again, and he's confident that what he's looking at is incredibly valuable. So he goes back home and he does some more research, and here's what he finds out. The land that cave is on is for sale. It's 10 acres for $30,000. And so what he does is he quits the football team. He gets 2 part-time jobs. He breaks up with his girlfriend, and he dedicates himself to working as hard as he can to earn as much money. He's scared that if he tells a single other person what was in the cave, that they would buy it and they would reap the benefit. And so he works tirelessly. All summer long, he's working 60, 70 hours a week. He's checking the internet daily to see if anybody has tried purchasing that land. And he finally reaches the point where he's made $24,000. And he has one last move. He sells his truck, gets $5,000, and then goes and negotiates the sale of that land for $29,000. Now here's the thing, is like, he didn't have the equipment to go and actually pull out the silver. So he calls in a geologist. They actually go and they look and they confirm that he's sitting on a silver deposit. And so a mining company buys the land for $6 million. It's incredible. He turns $29,000 into $6 million. For months, everyone thought he was crazy. They didn't understand why he was quitting his extracurriculars, dumping his girlfriend, and working every single minute he possibly had. But he did it because he knew that there was something valuable on the other side of it. And in Matthew 13:44, Jesus tells the exact same story. It says, "The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure that a man discovered, hidden in a field, and in his excitement, he hid it again, sold everything he owned to get enough money to buy the field." You were made for more. See, Jesus is wondering, when are you going to stop segmenting and compartmentalizing your life? That you'll recognize that nothing else will ever satisfy you the way that He will. That there's that thing that you have put in a position between you and Him that is not making your life better, but it's actually preventing you from experiencing life to the full, life the way that God has always wanted you to have it. And see, had that rich young man actually seen what was offered, he would have seen that the money that would be sold off and given away to the poor was just a small price for what was actually being offered to him. God in human form is offering him a seat around the table. He's answering the question that so many of us have been asking for years and decades and centuries and millennium. How much is enough? The gospel is this: you were made for more. But because of sin, we run to anything and everything else other than God to try and satisfy it. And Jesus died to literally bring us to completion. See, the first set of baggage that we have to eliminate is the baggage that we refuse to give to God. And sometimes it's a bad thing that makes a lot of sense to exchange, but other times it's a good thing. And like the man who finds the treasure in the field, you have to sell everything, but knowing with extreme confidence that something even more valuable is on the other side. See, the Messiah, the Son of the living God, is inviting you into a relationship with Him. And for some of you, that means to start a relationship. And it's not me who's even prompting you right now. It's God that's actually speaking to you across the screen right now, that you have been searching for wholeness and you've never actually found it, but He's offering it to you. And I'm trusting God that to give up is to gain. That if you give your life to Christ, it doesn't matter what's cost is on this side, it is worth it. But for others, it's to submit your agenda and your hopes to Him. That you have been trying to have Jesus plus something else, and you need to realize that He is ready. He is ready to take your whole life and give you something so much better on the other side of it. The thing that you think is bringing you completion and wholeness, it's a weight. And it's too much. You were made for more. Let me pray for you. God, I'm asking right now for those who need to say yes to you for the very first time, that you give them this prayer of, God, I'm asking you to forgive me of my sins and take full control of my life. I'm not going to keep some of it back, but I'm going to give you everything. God, I'm also praying for those who need to say for maybe the first time in a long time, that God, I'm done trying to have you plus other things, but I'm going to hand it off, that there is no cost too high because I know the treasure is worth it. That there is no amount of loss here that can even compare to what is being offered on the other side. And so, Lord, you have everything. You have my entire heart. And I praise in your Son, Jesus' name. Amen.